Hello, everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Every week, photographers meet here to connect, inspire, and create. And if you'd like to join us live, you'll find the schedule for upcoming sessions on my website at lindanickell.com. Every week, my guests share their photography tips and insight into their creative journeys, and they inspire us to look at a subject a little differently. Tonight, my guest is Amy Ames. Amy is a North Carolina-based wildlife, landscape, and adventure photographer, a photography workshop instructor, and she offers mentoring and one-on-one coaching. Amy's portfolio is filled with photographs that reflect her passion and respect for wildlife and the untamed beauty of the world's majestic landscapes. In tonight's presentation, Yellowstone, Where the Wild Things Are, Amy invites us to step into a winter wonderland and will give us a peek at Yellowstone National Park in the dead of winter. She will share her experiences braving the cold to capture the park's stunning snow-covered landscapes and the unique behaviors of its wildlife during the harshest season. Through her photographs, Amy will share some of her favorite moments of Yellowstone at its most serene and magical. You can connect with Amy through Linktree /Point Ames and Shoot. And if you're on Instagram, you can find her at Point Ames and Shoot. And I will put those links in the comments in the notes section. So with that, welcome to the Happiness Hour, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me. I love having such a nice big crowd here tonight. You guys are so fun.
There's some good people in here. And what's even more fun, if you have a chance and look at some of their Instagrams, a lot of these people are great photographers. So
I can imagine.
yeah, so it's a fun group. Okay, I went through your website. Yay, you have one. Yay, you have an about page. So I extracted what I found interesting and what I wanted to point out. But if there's something that I missed that you want to fill in, feel free to do that. So
Okay.
I'm going to give it to you.
Okay. So, just a little bit about me as a photographer. I, like so many people, became a photographer when I had kids of my own, and my photography budget got smaller and smaller as my husband got more annoyed with the process. So he bought me a camera instead, and I became a photographer. And I have managed a team of newborn hospital photographers for the last 13 years and still continue to do that job. So still do a little bit of newborn photography. We took our family on a trip to Yellowstone National Park, which was my first time there as an adult in 2016. And we also visited Grand Teton, and we were in the town of Jackson, and my mother-in-law and I made our way into one of the famous galleries in there. And it was a very hard struggle to get me out of there. So I was desperate to buy a print from in there, and my husband would not do it, but agreed to buy me the tools to make my own prints instead. And that's how all of that was born. So the next summer, I went on my first wildlife trip with that same said photographer to Alaska, and went to Yellowstone a couple months after that for the very first time in the middle of the winter, and have been hooked ever since and have yet to miss a winter yet. So that is my photography journey. Yellowstone is my favorite place in the world, but also all places cold are my favorite. You can often find me anywhere where it's snowy. So
Well, I think I did tell you I've had the opportunity to travel a bit, and my favorite photography trip was Yellowstone in winter. And when, I invited you to come, and it was because I found photos of your Yellowstone wildlife and snow. And I'm like, I wonder if she would do it specifically to that. And when you asked me, is there a topic? And I'm like, yeah, Yellowstone or winter. Wildlife in winter is what I was interested in. So I personally am excited to see what you have to share. And I'm looking forward to hearing some tips from you, because I I live in Texas, and I grew up in South Texas, and I did not own a coat until I was an
wow.
adult and started traveling. And when I went to Yellowstone for the first time, my friends had to outfit me because I was not prepared.
Yes.
Like at one point, I'm like, I can't feel my ankles. It was something else. So, all right, with that, go ahead and start if you'd like.
Okay, all right. So I am going to share my screen now. So basically what I have done tonight for this presentation is I put together my favorite 100 photographs of Yellowstone in the winter. So it's not going to be just wildlife, but I also wanted to include a little bit of landscape too, because so much of the magic of Yellowstone comes from the landscape. So a day in the life of Yellowstone in the winter can be anything from a day like this with lots and lots of snow, or we so often get beautiful sunny skies that are just as beautiful too. My wish for people when they're on a trip with me is always that they might have one day of like excessive snow like this because it's like a snow globe and so exciting, and then maybe a couple days of sunny or cloudy, but much easier to shoot in those conditions than it is in these conditions like this picture. So I'm going to share tips along the way as we go through and a couple of my favorite stories from Yellowstone. So we will get started. This was a sunrise in Yellowstone a couple years ago that, often people don't think of Yellowstone as being a good place for landscape photos. So when you do have a good sunrise and you're at the perfect spot in Yellowstone, you pull over the car that we're in and you start taking pictures because it doesn't often line up that you have good color or a good sunrise or a good sunset with a nice landscape also. So this particular morning was great for that. So when you're driving in, it's just such a magical place that, you don't even have to always have wildlife in it for it to be such a stunning scene. The trees and snow-covered roads. This is a famous rock called Christmas Tree Rock. That's one of my favorite Yellowstone stories. And it's funny because I've been here in the spring, I've been here in the summer, I've been in the winter, and it really never shows itself as well as it does in the morning in the winter. And actually, we had one of those sun dogs that morning that you can see right there in the picture. But a lot of steam. This is the Firehole River. And back in the 1930s or the 1950s, somewhere along in there, in the summer on there's different stories between July 24th or August 24th. I think it started off as July, but now they've sort of moved the tradition to August. But there was a snowstorm and the Yellowstone was cut off from anyone being able to leave in the middle of the summer, which you wouldn't expect in there, but it was a rare, heavy snowfall. And they decided to celebrate Christmas at the Old Faithful Inn. So they decorated with Christmas trees, they sang Christmas carols, and had started a great new tradition. So as time has gone on, the employees that work there now in August are winding down their summer, and they have decided to celebrate Christmas on August 24th every year. So this is Christmas Tree Rock, and tradition is they pick a rookie from the Old Faithful Inn or somewhere within the service that might be a new one to send out. He wades out in the water and he decorates the Christmas tree in the middle of the night. But the problem is that's littering, and you're not supposed to litter in Yellowstone National Park. So what the rookie does is he leaves a 6-pack of beer for the rangers who have to come and undecorate the tree the next day. So that's how Christmas Tree Rock got its name. If you ever see the rock, it's really fun, but if you're not there in the winter, you can so easily miss it. So one of my favorite Yellowstone stories is that one. Just more driving in. And you'll see in this picture, these are the traditional, I don't have a lot of pictures with vehicles or human-made things in them, but that is one of the types of cars that we ride in the winter. I tend to stick to the interior of Yellowstone mostly in the winter, and most of these pictures are in the interior. And I'll tell you in a couple minutes why that I like the interior the most. But a typical any car can't just decide to drive into Yellowstone once they close down the park. You have to be a permit holder and have a permit to get in on that particular day. So one of my first tips is to overexpose for the snow. So our cameras like to meter for really bright situations like snow. The snow reflects a lot of light. Our cameras meter a little underexposed for snow because of that. So I always tell my people to overexpose by 1 to 2 stops, or else your pictures are going to come out gray and dull looking. So that's my first tip for shooting in the snow, is to overexpose by 1 or 2 stops. So no day is ever alike in Yellowstone. You can have these bright blue days where, you can hardly take a bad picture. This is the Tom Murphy tree. It's a famous tree. Tom Murphy is a photographer that's been taking pictures in Yellowstone for years and years, and this tree is nicknamed after him. So, very famous tree that everyone likes to visit up in Hayden Valley. This is also up in Hayden Valley. This is the Yellowstone River, a very picturesque river in the some in the wintertime that's much different than it is in the summer. So Old Faithful, everybody likes to visit Old Faithful, and that's no different in the winter than it is in the summer. Traditionally, people tend to, there's bleachers over here on the right-hand side of the picture where people tend to congregate and sit and watch it. I like to take my groups on a little hike, and we don't do a lot of hiking on these trips, but this one we do stay on a boardwalk, and we kind of walk around and go up to the far side of Old Faithful and watch from afar. There's lots of geothermal features up there, and it's really fun to get a great landscape view. You can actually see the Old Faithful Inn on, over here on the right-hand side when you're up there, and it's just a great view and so different from the normal view that you often see of the Old Faithful, Old Faithful erupting. So this was that scene. This is one of the famous pools that's up on that boardwalk as you're walking around. This is green prismatic, which typically you cannot visit in the wintertime like we were able to do this particular year. In 2021, it was a low snowfall year. And we had a different guide that day that let us be a little risky. And he let us go up on the trail that goes up above Grand Prismatic, which is generally closed in the winter. So we got a really nice view that you can't typically get from up above, and it was midday. So really fun to see it from that perspective, which was totally different than down below. Often in the winter, there's so much smoke there, the fog, that you're not able to see the features and the colors and all of the goodness that is there. One of my favorite parts of Grand Prismatic is all the layers that you can see, all the details. Just another angle of it. So the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone, everybody knows about it. It looks so much different in the wintertime than it does in the summer. It's really beautiful any time of year that you see it, but so much fun to see in the winter with the snow covering the canyon walls. And generally this fall is totally frozen over, and you just kind of go out on a boardwalk and you're able to get a great view of that scene. So it's beautiful. And then this is the end of a day, leaving at sunset. Another gorgeous view with the sun setting over the park. So, oops, I skipped one. So everybody knows the bobby socks trees in Yellowstone, and I wanted to tell you just about a project that I've done in there. It's funny, people have asked me for years to put all of these pictures together, and I've never done it, so I did it for you guys. But basically, I started in 2019 photographing these trees. That was my second trip in. And the bobby socks trees are famous, and I decided that every year that I visited Yellowstone, I wanted to photograph them in a different way. So I have so many different memories of these trees, and each one tells a different story. And I'm going to just bring you guys through the years of my bobby socks trees. This is the typical scene that most people photograph. This was my second year. It really gives you an idea of what the area looks like on any given day in the wintertime. Much different than the summer. I remember the first time I saw it in the spring, and I was like, whoa, this doesn't even look like the same place. This was one of my favorite years with the frost-covered trees. Same place, just slightly different view. ICM, everybody loves ICM. Those trees are perfect for ICM. So this particular year, I was really struggling with how I was going to capture the trees differently. I had a good friend with me along that's a really good landscape photographer, and she said, let's do the shadows. Like, let's get out and like middle of the day, let's try to capture those shadows with the things. So I kind of thought, well, this will do. It's okay, but I wasn't really excited about it. And then I kind of glanced over to the left at one moment, and I saw this happening right here. These guys were coming through the trees, and what a joy that was. Like, it was one of my most exciting Yellowstone moments because I've worked on these trees for so many years, and to have my favorite wildlife walk through them was a great experience. So that was a super fun year to capture that. This was this past year, which again tells such a story. This was a really dry year this past year, and never before have I seen grass sticking out of the snow. And they had such a low snowfall year and such a warm winter that you could see grass poking through. So I felt like in order to capture that, I wanted to do it somehow differently and did it this way. So that is my project with the bobby sox trees, which one of my other suggestions is don't forget the details. We're all there for the wildlife, and the wildlife is great, but the details also are so exciting and so fun to capture in all their different ways. So that's an important aspect of Yellowstone that people often forget. The hoarfrost along the trees in the mornings is just really like nothing that you've ever seen before. This is a situation where it wasn't snowing, but the hoarfrost was in the air, which it often is, and the sun was shining, so it created such a perfect scene for the hoarfrost in the air, but the sun behind it, and really fun perspective to get to see it like that. I always encourage my people to zoom in on the details, and not just get the whole picture, but also zoom in on those fun waterfalls. And this was at the bottom of a waterfall. Again, this was really bizarre last year with those warm temperatures that we had. This was not a situation we had seen. Usually this area was totally frozen over, and we photographed this at the beginning of a week, and then by the end of the week, it was totally gone. Had completely melted, and it was an open river, which you never really see there in this spot in the winter. So different years can produce such different things to photograph. Hoarfrost on the trees is like nothing. If you've never been to Yellowstone in the winter before, I can't even explain the blue. Like you have this like bright blue sky, and it just feels so cold even looking at the pictures. That's just hoarfrost all over the trees. And you go back in the morning and it can be -30, -40 degrees, and this hoarfrost just covers everything and creates such a winter wonderland that is like nothing else anywhere. So I always encourage people to get low with wildlife, always, even with landscape, but getting low is super important. So that's my next tip, is to get low. You get much different perspectives when you are down low on the ground versus standing up. As you can see, this would have been a totally different picture had we been standing up above this coyote looking down on him. Storytelling is a huge part of Yellowstone in the winter, and really being able to photograph the environment with the subject in it versus the subject and a little bit of the environment, I think is a big difference. And so important to me for images. And so I always like to encourage people to use your images for storytelling. We're all inclined to zoom way in on the bison or, the fox or whatever it is, and really create a portrait with them, which for many years was my favorite way of doing photography also. But I learned to slowly zoom out and really try to show a lot of the environment as well. So I encourage people to really use those wide angles to get the whole scene and not just your subject. There's different ways and different things that you can do with your storytelling, but storytelling is great when you can have an emotional impact, such as humor in it. So this was one of my favorite Yellowstone pictures ever of all time, and makes me laugh every time I see it. Laura, who's on here tonight, was actually with me when we took this shot. So we saw him standing right by that sign, and we were so excited. When you can have some environmental context with it, like photographing the environment with your subject in it versus the subject in the environment, such as this scene. So you see the bison, but you've also got really a lot of the environment in it. And it just tells so much more of a story than just zooming in on. You get a different perspective, unique perspectives, which whatever they are, can always tell a different story. So this one is zoomed in, but it's a much different perspective than most people try to get. So we were basically laying down on the ground for these. Oops, sorry. the overall mood of your photograph can also really help with your storytelling. So whether you're trying to convey peacefulness, tension, energy, mystery, really there's so many different ways that like the weather, the scene, all of that can really have a huge impact on your storytelling. My goal is to leave the viewer wanting to know more of the story. So maybe you know that there's these bison here, but why are the bison here? And you know it's cold, but what's the fog coming from? And really if you have your viewers that thinking about the pictures and wanting to know more, then I feel like I've done a good job of getting them interested in more than just the subject. I always wonder with this, like I have so many stories in my head as to what they were doing, but what always comes to mind is that this was like the meeting of the minds, and they were, coming up with some grand scheme here. These four bison that were so perfectly their heads together and looked like they were doing some big meetings. Black and white is great for storytelling. So my next suggestion is heads up. My biggest frustration ever, ever, ever is I really don't like to show wildlife eating unless it's something interesting like a fish, like a bear eating a fish, but bison with their heads down in the snow to me is like my number one no-no with the picture. So I always encourage people heads up. If you can be patient and wait, like, with bison, it could be a little while, but waiting just a couple of minutes conveys such a better message in your image. If you go from this to this, there's so much more interest in it, and it really draws the viewer's eyes in much more than eating. So I always encourage people, wait for the right moment, have patience, sit and wait until the right situation happens, and generally it will happen eventually. So the worst thing is when somebody sits down on one of my trips and they ask when the bears are going to come out and when they're going to see the bears. And there's usually one every year. So I have to warn people now, don't come to Yellowstone in the winter to see bears. You're going to see lots of other stuff, but you're never going to see bears. So just a little bit of all of the wildlife now. I want to just kind of go through some of my favorites that we see in the winter. Bison are always everybody's favorites. So many different ways to photograph bison. This was one of my favorite ones ever. I was on a boardwalk in the most, not even a really picturesque spot, and came around the corner, and this guy was right in front of my view in the most perfect framing, and snow all around him and on his face, and the light was nice, and you just never know where they're hiding. So eagles are lots of favorites there. There's eagles generally in certain spots, so we can always count on them being there. And then, lots and lots of them there in the winter that stay all winter long. Everybody's favorite foxes. The fox population has been a little bit lower the past several winters. So I've only seen one fox the last couple of winters, but my first many years in there, we would see them quite a bit. So no idea where they've been hiding, but they're always fun to photograph. Everybody loves these guys. So this is one of the few times where we can't get low on their level. We have to shoot down on them. This is from a bridge where we look down on them, and I'm zoomed in pretty far. But so much fun to watch. They have slides all around that you can see. I haven't captured a really, really good shot yet where you can see the slides and see the water all in one, but they're so much fun to watch. Everybody loves them. Lots of coyotes, or coyotes, however you want to say it. The locals call them coyotes. My family looks at me like I'm crazy if I come home from a trip and try to call them that. More eagles. The frost-covered bison is always a favorite. So in order to get the frost-covered bison, you've got to get to a really low temperature, and it doesn't always happen. Last year, I already told you we had a very warm winter last year, and we were around the 30s almost every day that I was in there. And no frosty bison last winter whatsoever. So that was really a disappointment for people who were super excited about getting the frosty bison, but we had some other experiences last year that made up for it. But everybody likes to come to Yellowstone for the frost. Whoops, I think that guy I went backwards, sorry. More bison. So this is actually one of the bison that I showed, the one in the storytelling image that was zoomed out. This is him now zoomed in, and really a much different picture zoomed in, and both have their own purpose and but really a lot different. Fun to see all the features. So the bison are one of the most unpredictable creatures in Yellowstone. So keeping a safe distance from them, they can travel much faster than you would think they could. They're slowed down a little bit in the winter, but still really fast. So this was actually taken out of the front of the snow coach window. So not down at eye level, but from a safe perspective, that was more important than being down on the ground. I've used the same guide for the last 7 years, and she's pretty particular about keeping us safe. So Pine Marten, the famous Pine Marten of 2023, who entertained more people in Yellowstone that year than probably ever before. He was behind a gas station. The gas station was closed for the winter, and there was this building back there that was actually a dorm and a trash can. And he was actually sitting on top of a trash can for this picture. But all winter long, people were able to photograph this guy, and there was actually a couple of them, but they entertained people. That particular spring, I went back the first day. This was up in Hayden Valley or at the canyon, actually. And I went back the first day that they opened for the spring and was able to catch a peek of them again. And then they shut off the gas station, and there was no more stopping there ever again since then. So if you went in 2023 and were able to see the famous Pine Marten there, you were lucky, because that was it. Super fast, fun to watch, and really fun to photograph. So anytime that you can get more than one animal in the subject, whether they're mating or whether they're a family or a pair, it really tells a lot more of a story than just one single coyote by himself. So this one we thought was a pair that were together we saw them a couple days together, kind of running around the valley. More frosty bison. This is a good storytelling image too, where the snow was pretty deep. This was a heavy snowfall year, and you could see that he was pretty well sunk down in there. And you just picture him trying to get through that snow. It takes so much energy for the bison to move in the middle of the winter. I feel like the steam really conveys, like, how cold it was. You can see the frost on the trees, the snow. It really, I mean, being a bison or any wildlife for that matter in Yellowstone in the winter is hard, but especially a bison. It takes, they eat this grass that you see here in the picture, which in the winter has
What?
oops.
Hang on one second. Let me
Yeah.
let me turn her. Hang on.
When you
Hang on, Judine. Hang on. Let me see if we can. Hang on. We tried to get one, but we did not. Ah, I don't see her. Judine, there you are. Okay. Hang on one second. Sorry about that. We usually try to catch everybody, but we didn't catch
That's
her.
okay.
All right, we're good.
So the bison eat this grass in the summer and in the winter. But in the winter, that grass is compared to like eating the cardboard box of cereal. So it's like eating cereal in the summer, but in the winter, it's like eating the outside of the box. So they have to consume so much of that for fuel for their bodies. So you think about like the trudging through the snow and how hard that is just to get through with, so much required eating. And really, that's why they eat all day long. And that's why it's hard to get pictures of them when they're not eating, because it is just so much is needed for fuel that it takes a lot to get enough energy for them to survive in the winter. And bison, actually, a fun fact about them is they don't actually get cold until it's below -30. So up to -30, they're pretty good. After -30, it really starts to take a lot more energy and it's harder for them. Let's see, trying to move. Sorry, I did something wrong here. All right. This was actually the same bison zoomed in. Just, the difference between a zoomed in picture profile shot versus showing the whole environment. So the more you can show the environment, the more of a story you're going to show with your image. So everybody's favorite are always wolves. I sort of tried to save all of my wolf encounters to the end so we could really talk about them. This was the first year. This was 2019. It was my first wolf encounter. And I have to say that almost every year since then has gotten better and better. This particular year, we had spent a lot of time on one of our days really focusing on trying to listen for the wolves all day and spent a lot of time out on the road, standing and waiting and listening and looking for clues, looking for footprints. And finally, at the end of the day, we were granted a couple that ran around in the field. This was actually in the bobby sox trees field that we were able to see them for a little bit. So that was my first experience. And one of the reasons that I love the interior of Yellowstone so much more than I like the Lamar Valley area is that there aren't as many wolves here, but the encounters that I've had there have been much closer than you typically get in Lamar Valley. So there's definitely way more packs in the Lamar Valley area, but I feel like in the interior, from my experience, I've been able to have much closer encounters with them. So this was the next year, and the Park Service had taken a bison that had died and dumped it over at a field. I think it was called picnic table field or something. And somehow we were able to catch a glimpse of this pretty far away and were able to kind of sneak down in and tuck ourselves behind some trees. We were at a safe distance and spent about 4 hours in a row watching these wolves consume the bison and play. And this was the Wapiti pack, the pack that I've had the most experience with over the years, and have watched that pack really change, all different members of the pack. And it's been really fun to watch them through the years. This was that same particular year. This was the alpha male in this photo. The alpha female was the white one right here. And I think this was actually 2020 that happened. This was the next year, 2021. This was actually in Lamar Valley, one of my few pictures from Lamar Valley. And what happened here was that this was the Junction Butte pack of wolves. They took down a bison way far away on a hill. That's why these pictures aren't that great. But the bison you can see is here in the field. And basically what happens was just unbelievable to watch. But the bison basically held a funeral for this member of their family. The wolves stood by. They all sort of were in the area, but allowed the bison to pay their respect. And sometimes this goes on for 20 minutes. Sometimes it goes on for a few hours. And basically all other wildlife tolerates this and allows them to have their time of grieving. It's such a human-like behavior that it was fascinating to watch, and really like nothing I'd ever seen before. We watched it until it got dark, went back the next morning, and the whole scene was totally different. But for about 2 hours after the bison was taken down by this wolf pack, they allowed the family to mourn, and it's called a funeral, actually. We as humans call it a funeral. The bisons have a funeral too, and it's basically the family mourning. So it was really an incredible thing to watch. This was, same scene, just a little bit different, but it went on for 2 hours of basically after the 2 hours, the wolves finally got impatient with the situation and kind of pushed the family out. The bison all went along the ridge and walked away and left, and then the wolves moved in after that. This would be the next year. This was 22. Unfortunately, you probably can tell this is not a sharp photo. I had a little bit of heat refraction that year. That's actually what I'm blaming it on. We're not 100% sure of exactly what happened, but our bus that year we were driving, I said here that you have to predict nature's drama, and basically knowing your wildlife and knowing their behavior is going to help you so much, and having the ability to catch great shots. So our guide was driving. She saw a herd of bison way behind these trees over here running, and bison running in that particular area is not a normal behavior for them. And so she stopped and kind of put her binoculars up and thought, this is not normal, something's going on. Within probably 3 minutes, the entire Wapiti pack was chasing about 4 or 5 bison towards us. we never were able to get out of the van because they basically ran right straight towards our van, ran behind the van. Netflix happened to be behind us, but that was at that point the most exciting thing that I'd ever seen in Yellowstone before. And I will say the bison won. This particular bison got lucky and got away. I showed you a picture a couple of minutes ago of a scene where there was a field of bison and there was a lot of fog and stuff up above. That was actually the other side of the road after this scene happened. So it was crazy. One of the just like the craziest things, we had criers in the van, we had screamers, we had excitement. 50,000 pictures probably taken in 5 minutes of such great excitement. So I'd also switched to Canon for 1 year that year and just switched back to Nikon, had a brand new camera, and either had heat diffraction or user error, who knows which one it was, but none of my pictures were in great focus. So I've worked on these a little bit, but so then that brings us to this year. Last year, actually, I should say, was a very low wolf year. We had very few sightings last year, which was 2023, and the Wapiti pack actually went through a lot of change last year. The members broke up, and all winter long, the pack was seen as individual members instead of as one big pack. And consequently, people didn't really see the Wapiti pack a lot last winter. There were a couple sightings, but nothing like other winters. So that brings us to 2024. I was on my first group that I had in this year. We had word that there's a bobcat down the Madison River, and so we were driving in looking very much so for a bobcat when we came upon this scene, which was a wolf in the middle of the road. And we got out, and before we realized that there was several wolves around, and on the hill there were many more wolves. And then they crossed the river. On the other side of the river, they had a bison trapped that we would basically watch for the next 3 days as this bison went through the cycle of life. So the whole entire Wapiti pack, which was 15, 16 members, I think, this winter, when we arrived about 7:30 in the morning, he was already injured on his hind side. So something had happened in the night. More than likely, he was a injured bison to begin with. They knew he had some type of weakness and took him down for that reason. But we sat there that first day on the side of the river for the entire day. And we're actually able to get permission to stay a little bit longer, and watched as this pack, we were about 75 feet away, which the normal rule is 100 feet away for wolves. But because we had a natural river between us, we were allowed to stay closer. So probably closer than I will ever be to wolves and watching their behavior any other time in my whole life. So we watched a whole day of the bison. He would get in the water, then he would get out of the water. The wolves would play around, they would rest, they would sleep on the hill. At the end of the day, about 6 o'clock at night, it was almost time for us to leave because you have to be out of there by the time it gets dark in the winter. The bison was done. He really had it, and I think he was out of energy. He was out of his breaths, and he decided that he was not going to let them pick at him anymore. And he basically went into the river and decided to die on his own. So the wolf pack watched from the riverbed. Really, this was way too cold a water for them to get into. They could get in to cross it. They could get in where it was really shallow, but he actually happened to be where it was deep too. And he walked out, he walked into the middle of the river, and he sat there for about an hour, I think I was told, before he died. And once he took his last breath, he kind of sunk down in. And you just could imagine those wolves and the horror of, we had one job, and our job was to get this bison. And we've just spent the whole day doing this. And now the bison's in the middle of the river. So then for the next 30 minutes or so before we had to leave, we watched as they watched in horror as the bison, just stood out there, and you knew he wasn't going to come back at this point. They ran around. These were actually some younger members of the Wapiti pack this winter. These were all the pups, and they ran around the hill. They played with each other. Watching their behavior at such an amazing distance was really life-altering for me. Probably something that just doesn't happen to people very often. This was some of their playfulness. And I probably have about 5,000 pictures just from the first day. between two cameras. This is what we found the next morning. So finally we had to leave at 6:30. We came back the next morning. I actually wasn't scheduled to be in the park that day. That was supposed to be an off day between my two groups. And my first group just refused to leave basically that night. And we were able to get someone to get us back in there. And this is what we found the next morning. So we were told by the ranger who was able to stay after we left that right after we left, he died and washed down the river, landed at this particular spot where there was a rock that caught him. And immediately he said he heard the pack go out and began to feast on the bison. So a life lost. But the circle of life in Yellowstone, as I always say, is never more evident than it is in the winter. It's raw, raw, raw in there in the winter. So there were many times during the day where, we would leave our cameras on and turn around and cry, and very, very hard situation to watch. But in the end, the number of bodies that were fed by that one carcass was really incredible to see the amazingness of that. So this was the next morning. We kind of stationed ourselves downriver and watched as the pack really had first dibs on it. Eagles moved in, the ravens moved in, slowly some coyotes moved in, a fox, we never saw the fox, but I'm told the fox moved in. So it's about, I probably should have warned you guys, there was some kind of gruesome stuff here. Hopefully everybody's okay with this. This was, if you don't know, if people don't know about this, basically the way that the pack is fed is that the alpha male and female feed first. Usually some of the younger members will like tear open the skin, and then there's a pecking order and how that goes with the eating. So once everybody's had their fair chance, then they would sort of run in and out of eating. And the eating went on that entire second day. The third day, this was still the second day. Neat to see the eagles. The eagles would kind of sit in the tree and wait until there was not a wolf on it, and then they would jump in there. And then lots more playing behavior. This was actually the third day and our last wolf encounter for 2024, but we saw the entire pack running down the river, which was really great to watch. So a lot of wolf activity this year. We had one quiet year, and then I don't know what'll ever top it. My guide has been messaging me all summer telling me that she's really happy that I'm into birding now because there's a lot of pressure for what's going to happen next year. So maybe birds. So my last little bit of advice is don't overlook the little guys. It's so many people come to Yellowstone in the winter and want to see the wolves and the foxes and the stuff that's really hard to find. And there's so much beauty with everything, including the ravens. This year, all we wanted by the end was a raven, and we couldn't find the ravens. Like, it was crazy. The guide ended up bringing us through the town of West Yellowstone to the dumpsters, because there was people that wanted pictures like this so badly. So basically my point is just don't overlook the little guys, because they're just as important as the wolves and all of the stuff that's so popular, but that people go to. I find that the people that have the best time in Yellowstone in the winter are the ones that go with no expectations, and they find beauty wherever they look, not just for one particular thing. And in all my years, I've only had one person who was unhappy, and he only went for the wolves. So it's super important not to go just for the wolves. And that is the end of my presentation.
Wow, 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 wow. Okay. So let me ask you to take your screen down.
Okay.
And tell you, you've done nothing to deter me from trying to get Yellowstone out of my system. I've got to go. Photos were, the comments will reflect what everybody else thought, but stunning, gorgeous, those words kept coming up and popping up into the chat. And that's exactly what your photographs are. Stunning.
Oh, thank you so much.
So I've got a couple of questions I want to put in front of you.
Okay.
Grab them real quick. But so Carolyn, let's start with Carolyn's question. She's was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing some of your settings for snow.
So every setting is different. It's really hard to give settings for exactly what I would say with the snow, because it depends upon whether you have sun or not sun. If I'm shooting wildlife, I'm almost always wide open to start with if I'm using a long zoom lens. And so I start usually wide open, so that depends on whatever you have. And then I often will use auto ISO in the wintertime, especially if there's a lot of action going on because the light could be changing. And but I do set that compensation over by two stops over, so that that accounts for the crazy metering that happens in the snow. But I can't really give you settings. Any wildlife, I'd like to start with a shutter speed of around 1,000 and wide open. And then my ISO is adjusted around that.
Okay. And I was expecting this question to come in. So Erica's question is, can you tell us what lens and camera body you typically use?
I shoot with a Z8, which is not quite the flagship for Nikon, but almost. I had the Z9 for a while. I do have arthritis and it's particularly bad on my wrist, so I try to have as light a stuff as possible. So I shoot with two Z8 bodies, and I have a 400 millimeter 2.8, which is great. Nikon has the built-in teleconverter, so it goes out to 560. And a lot of them, I mean, these pictures that I just showed you have been throughout the years. So I mean, I've had a 500 PF for years that was a much cheaper lens than the 2.8 and took amazing pictures. You don't have to have the very best of the equipment in order to get great pictures in there. Just knowing how to use it is the most important thing.
Okay. Jamie's question is, when sitting for long periods waiting for the animals, how do you
Mhm.
stay warm?
Well, as much as I love cold weather, I am someone who gets cold very easily and does not like to be cold. So,
Okay.
um, so
That
I
makes
wear a
it
lot of
better.
wool. Yeah, I always have wool base layers, and then I have a wool sweater usually. I don't even do fleece, and then I will literally buy the most amazing coat that money will buy because I have to be warm. But with that said, temperatures, again, like I said, can range from -40, -50 to 30 to 40 in the wintertime. In fact, after we were there last year, there were some days in the 50s, which is just really unheard of. And so, sometimes it's a lot harder than other times. I do have heated socks. I have, photographer gloves that are wool lined and then heated outside layers. And I will say the great thing about the way we do it in the winter is that our bus is always right there. And it's a very small bus. When I say bus, it's not like a big school bus type thing, and it holds 12 people. So I usually bring groups of 8 in the winter. And our bus is usually very close by. So if you get cold, you can always go on to the bus. And we aren't typically sitting out for long periods of time. The longest I've ever done was the year that we watched the wolves on the bison carcass from afar. And we probably sat there for 3 hours that day. And I was pretty sure I had frostbite when I was done, but it was worth it. So, I mean, your adrenaline gets going and you're so excited that, it's really all worth it. But the van is always there with a warm heat running if you need it. So,
Yeah, it's kind of funny, any other time I'd be complaining about being cold or wet, but when I'm doing photography and the action is there, you just kind of forget the discomfort because you're so into what
right.
you're doing and what you're seeing, and you just want to take it all in. So that's cool. Let me drill down for Judine. She's looking for gloves or mittens. Can you tell her what you're using?
Okay, so I use different things. The Heat Company those are the ones that Charles Glatzer does, I think, right? The company that he has is traditionally what I've worn for years. And I usually have to, I mean, I lose them like nobody's business. It's ridiculous. So I have to buy new ones every year. I'm so sorry. I can look it up and let you guys know later. But I forget what they're called. But it's Charles Glatzer's. He owns like the US version. Heat Company. Laura just said that down there. Thank you, Laura. Heat Company. Just make sure you buy from the US site, not the Canadian site, because the Canadian site charges you like $50 in shipping. So this year I am an affiliate for Stio, and I am trying to transition over to their gloves. Stio is a company out of Jackson Hole, Wyoming. I have my first set of winter gloves from them, and I'm very hopeful that they're going to be good too. So stay tuned for that. But honestly, gloves are a hard thing, and the layering system is what you need. I like to have wool layer really close to my hands, and then an outer layer that can be taken off if needed to be taken off.
Barb's question is, do your gloves have open fingers so that you can mess with your fingers?
So my inside layer is the thin ones that you can, kind of like the phone type ones that you can use
Mhm.
like for your cell phone that like are really thin and they have like the little pointy things on them. I can usually shoot in those. If it's -30, you don't want any exposed skin. So generally that outside layer, with the heat company has like a little zipper kind of right here that you can take back if you need to and pin it back, or you can keep it closed. So on my left hand, I'll usually keep it closed. If there's a lot of action, I might unzip the right hand and kind of flip it back.
Okay. And I don't know, it says Wrath B, so I'm not sure what her name is, but
Kim.
her question, oh, is it Kim? Okay. When it's snowing, what are you using to protect your camera?
So that's a great question, Kim. So most of our camera gear is weatherproof. So if I'm going out in the snow for a really quick period, I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm just gonna like have a microfiber that I'll dry it off with when I get back on the van. Honestly, it's not as big of a concern as you think. Now, like the picture that I started the presentation with the snow coming down that heavily, if I'm shooting in that for any long period of time, I am going to have a raincoat over my camera. So that raincoat can be anything from a full raincoat that's made for your camera that I've bought on B&H to I always have, and I bring them for all my people on my trips, like shower caps that you get in a hotel. Because if you are running out for just a minute and you just need to cover like your camera, you can put a clear shower cap over it and it keeps the snow out really nicely. So there's all sorts of different levels of rain gear that you can use that protects it. But honestly, when it's snowing really heavily, we're not generally out there for too long a time. So it's pretty quick.
This was great, Amy. I knew it would be, but I'm just excited that okay, so let me make my own personal comments. But the the Bobby sock tree
Mhm.
project, oh my goodness,
Oh, thank
was
you.
wonderful. That is such a great um, project that you've set up for yourself, and it gives you something to aim for every year. But I don't know, I'd be surprised, and but I don't know how you're going to beat the bison walking
I
through.
know. I don't know how I will either. Like I mean, this year was really interesting with the grass coming up. It made for a neat ICM because it was so different. But I probably will never. I mean, maybe if a pack of wolves went through there, that would help. But
Maybe. That is a something else kind of photo. That was just really wonderful. Jamie's
yeah.
comment was maybe an eagle will swoop in for you at some point.
Yeah, yeah, or porcupine. I mean, I've like dreamed of a porcupine in Yellowstone in the winter, and I've never been able to get one before. I'm told they're all over. So maybe if like a porcupine was walking up the tree, or I don't know. I mean, there's got to be something that I've got to aim for that.
There's always going to be something to beat, but man, that's a photo that if you never get anything good again, you've got something wonderful. Absolutely
Yeah,
wonderful.
thank you.
Um, I want to make a funny comment just because my brain went that way. I think you need to come up with a drink on the bus. You can't take alcohol into the park. I get that, but something called the Frosty Bison, that just made me giggle when you said.
I know the frosty bison. That would be a really good name for a drink. That is true.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming and sharing what you know and your experiences. And so I don't know if you said it, and if you did, I didn't catch it. What time of year? I know it's winter, but what time of year, month are you going to
I
Yellowstone?
always go in January, and there's really no particular reason that I've always gone in January, so I've sort of stuck to that because I've had good luck in January. So I know that you sometimes have more snowfall as the winter goes on, and it can be harder for the wildlife to get around the more snowfall there is. Um, I just feel like I've always had good luck in January, so I like to stick with things that work. So this year I have 3 trips going in the middle of January, a couple weeks in a row, and likely we'll stick to that in the coming years.
Well, thank you for doing this for us. I so appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna maybe, I don't know. I'll just ask you in front of everybody. I would love for you to come back and do another one for us. I'll give you some time, but I would love
Okay.
you to come back just because this is one of my favorite places to visit. And yeah, that's a selfish thing for the happiness hour again.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Let me go ahead and close out this session. Amy, thank you so much for coming and sharing. And I wish you,
Thank you.
I'm assuming you're getting ready for your next trip in a couple of months then.
Yep, that's it.
Do you have any openings for your?
Not for this coming year. No, nope. And in March, I will start advertising for the next year. So
Good for you. Next week, Tamron Ambassador Elise Bender joins us with her presentation, Low Light Landscapes. Until next time, go out and create something beautiful.